Yeah,
Well, we are.
cool. Well, let me do a small introduction. So, welcome to our end of the year video. It's our first and our last video of the year.
My name is Martin and I'm from Norway. I'm 37 years old. I work as a coach. I worked in sales all my life and also been working with leadership now for 15 years. I'm really interested in what makes people tick and why some people perform and some don't. So that's why I'm also really interested in feedback.
My name is Hubert Everking. That's a very, very Dutch name, which is not so easy to pronounce. I come from the commercial side of the business, but over my last 25-year career, I slowly but surely made the shift to the people side. And in the last 10 years, we've been running a small training outfit, which is focused on helping teams and their leaders perform better, specifically when it comes to soft skills. And like you, Martin, I'm extremely curious about people and why they do certain things and how we learn. So, Martin, how come we actually sit together today? Because that's in itself a interesting story, a Norwegian and a Dutch guy.
Yeah, well, I guess it's the universe was aligned for us to meet each other at a coaching training in Oslo some time ago now, and we just hit off. You have, of course, history with feedback, and had a wish on my bucket list for many years that I would write a book, but I never felt that I was kind of able to do it. So when you asked, it was a perfect match for me.
Yeah, I got some questions from friends and people around me who immediately said, so how are you going to monetize this? What is the business model around what you're doing? And I think it's a very good question.
Yeah, I think it hasn't been a formal business model. It's more like an all-consuming hobby that we're really interested in the same topics, and we're just dedicated and enjoying the time that we use to discuss these points because it fascinates us.
I have to say, Martin, when we went into this, I didn't really realize as well how liberating it can be to actually work without a business model and just because you're doing something you feel is important for people around you. And I'm really enjoying that freedom, not to have a client or a sponsor or a contract or somebody who wants to professionally publish this book.
Yeah, I agree. I think that also makes it much more valuable for people because we're just following up on what we think is interesting and what's valid for people. And I think that's is a wonderful way to work.
Now, another question I get, and we actually got 10 years ago, Martin, when we published the first book and when we set up our business around training teams and leaders to communicate better. Some people said to us, why this focus on feedback? Why don't you make it much bigger? Why don't you say leadership and then you have maybe feedback in there? But we actually the opposite. We have this hyper focus on feedback.
Well, if you take leadership, for example, it's so big. It's a theme that you can study all your life, and it will always be some parts of it that you haven't kind of nested or went through. So I think that it's more important to do the small things really, really well. And I think that feedback is the core of not only leadership, but also on how team work together, how companies work together. I think that feedback is so essential and so important that if you do that well, the other things will kind of fall in line.
I think that feedback is probably one of the most or more difficult forms of communication, but it is also one of the forms where you see a lot of benefit if you improve. Yeah, so people can work faster, people engage more with each other, and you just see better relationships. The fact that it's so challenging makes it challenging for us, but the fact that the reward is so big makes it also something you would really like to to focus on.
So there's so many parts of it that are complicated and intertwined
Yes,
that it's so hard to do correctly. But like you say, when you do it correctly, the benefits are so high.
exactly. And if I look at the programs we've run, and we're still running right now, right? If you say, okay, what makes feedback work in companies? Then I would tell you right now, it's probably a combination of having the right skills. Yeah. So how do you give? How do you receive? And there already you're talking about big complexity, right? Because we're humans, we need courage to say what we want. We need courage to actually take certain things. We need to manage our emotions. We need to manage our relationship. So that's one, skills. The second one is the fact that you need to have motivation to actually do it within a group. And usually that comes from a leader. Not always, but you need leadership or a leader who at least starts the fire and makes it. So now we're talking about leadership. Then the third part, which we spend a lot of time on, is just being in an environment, or, let's make it a bit bigger, in a culture which actually supports this behavior as well. If any of those three are not available, it already becomes difficult. So now we're talking about three things which by themselves, again, are big. So it might seem as we're hyper-focused, but actually to make all of that work, we have many, many elements in play, which are, again, by themselves, not easy to get right.
Yeah. And just to have one example on that, there's so many different cultures and so many different ways of giving feedback. So if a Swede and a guy from Argentina works together, they have different cultures on how they give feedback, and that's makes it even more complex.
But look, Martin, let's talk about company culture. Let's talk about an example where certain banking sectors have fairly toxic cultures when it comes to speaking up, where people are extremely competitive and use feedback in 360 performance reviews, annual performance reviews, as a way to forward their own careers or torpedo somebody else's. Again, even culture splits up in different components, right? We can also talk about different generations and how they communicate.
Yeah, it's so complex. It's not that you can kind of have it one and done and then you're finished with the learning of feedback. It changes. So you mentioned new generations coming into the workplace. The Gen Z are much more used to getting constant feedback. If you take, for instance, social media, you put up a post and you get likes going in.
Very good. And you're right. I come from a generation where, as a leader, you had to be tough, and vulnerability and, showing what you could call weakness, but actually talking about how you feel and all of those soft skills was not something that was advertised as good leadership.
No.
Giving people positive feedback or recognition was also not something which was part of our toolkit.
You can be lucky and just to have kind of the culture click or the relationships click. But I think it's important to have that discussion and to kind of keep having it also so you can stay on top of it.
Now you're talking about discussions, but one of the things we're planning is to start sharing what we call plays, which are basically little interventions or little activities teams can do to improve feedback and to create an environment where feedback can live, where people feel safe to speak up. So what we see more and more is that teams by themselves and the leaders in those teams actually start to play these little practical workshops themselves.
That's really interesting with the thing that you're talking about there, because it has so many layers. One of them are how hard and how challenging it is to be a leader, because you need to adapt to different people that you are leading. For instance, I've been having a team now for many years, and some of them needs feedback constantly. And want it and crave it. Was it good enough? Was it something I could do better? And other people are much more independent and don't want that feedback. And just adapting to that and seeing how the different the people are, and just making sure that everybody gets what they need are so important in leadership.
Sometimes I think we're a bit overly focused on leadership as the strong man or the strong woman at the top who kind of gives the orders or the direction and the rest follow. I think I see more and more that leadership becomes a kind of a shared practice, and especially in teams where there are experts who are all responsible for doing their part of the team job. Leadership jumps from one person to another person. And I think it's always great to see that people take that role as well and can switch between leading and following.
Yeah.
And as you say, when the administrative hierarchical leader leaves the room and everything collapses, that doesn't work anymore.
No.
Right? However, Martin, what I do have to say is that still we often see it's the leader who takes the initiative. It's the leader who opens up the dance floor. It's the leader who dares say something which might be a bit uncomfortable. And from there on, many times we see teams take over and the leader following.
Yeah, it's much easier for everyone if the leader starts. But I also think that you can have leadership as a title, but you also have kind of these leaders that don't have the title, but they take the role. So they're like the captain on the football team.
Trends for 2025, Martin. What are some of the things that you think will have their effect or we will see in the workplace in 2025?
I think that one of the trends that we're going to see more of is AI in use of soft skills. So the use of AI in personal management, for instance, as a leader, trying to kind of spar and train for a difficult conversation before having it. I think the use of AI in kind of the workplaces today are so little on what's actually possible to do. And I think that in 2025, we will have more of an understanding of what's possible. And using AI with soft skills, I think that will be one of the big trends for 2025.
About this, I sometimes think that this is also a bit scary for people because now we're touching what we thought before were uniquely human characteristics. And mixing that with AI somehow freaks people out a bit. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I agree. And what's interesting is that I found when I started to do this, that in many ways, AI is more human than the humans. I just started the conversation with ChatGPT, and it was such a revelation on how human actually that feels. I, for instance, use it when I'm preparing for work meeting or a difficult conversation with an employee, or just preparing for a workshop. The other day, I had a conversation with Carl Jung.
Yeah, you told me.
Of course, as an AI, but it's really, really interesting to kind of use it in that way and not just to summarize or to translate or to do transcript or something like that.
Because I think many of us still see AI as a piece of technology, which ultimately it is. But AI is actually trained on all human knowledge, and it's trained on human language and how phrases and words work, and it's a prediction machine. So actually the background of AI is pure human knowledge and language, right? You're interacting with part of humanity. Some people then say, yeah, but it's the average of humanity, so I'm better than that. Well, I don't think many of us are better than average humanity. I think if we were 1% of that, we would already be quite good. But I really resonate with this feeling that I don't think the way we use AI here is taking away from our humanity. I actually think it brings it out.
Yeah.
Because if I can become more knowledgeable or more prepared into meetings and difficult conversations, my relationships are going to be so much better.
I also think that it's important to remember that I would like my coach to use AI to be the best coach possible for me, but still give me that human connection and that human interaction. So I think that the combination is so important. But I see that there's many people that are kind of afraid because they think that, oh, it's so far ahead. I will never understand it. I can never use it. And I think that that trend will just continue and get stronger. The more extremely cool things that we see AI comes up with, that gap will feel very
Yeah.
big for people.
The only thing I can say there, many times I've seen friends and clients just getting into it, just starting to use it on a mini scale, and seeing what comes out is the first step, which usually as a ripple effect leads to a bit more and to a bit more. And it's such a pity when some people say, well, this is too complex, I won't even try.
Yeah, I think that it's kind of the same when the internet came, right? I think there were many people that were kind of hesitant because it was such a disruption. It was such a big change. But I think this will be even more so. I think that the change that we will see with AI in the following or the coming years will be extreme. Having said that, I also must say that it's so easy to use. It's so intuitive and so good programs that anybody can use it.
Something I'm personally very interested in is this idea of AI becoming like eating junk food, right? So yes, I can ask AI to write me a speech about nuclear fusion. I don't know anything about nuclear fusion. I could potentially give that speech to a bunch of scientists and then run out of the room, because as soon as they ask me questions, of course, I don't know anything. So I think there is a certain danger in AI actually becoming a crutch for people, right? If you don't know anything about a topic and you're only using AI to skim through on a very, very superficial level certain pieces of knowledge, you will be found out and you will not be able to really judge what AI gives you. And in the end, you need to be the human in the loop. So I think having good domain knowledge of the topics you're using AI for is extremely important.
Also, time you save in having AI as a productivity tool, I think that you should invest that time in staying ahead of the development in the technology so you can use AI as much as possible, but also to be as knowledgeable as possible on the themes that you're actually working with. And like you say, of course, the people that have been working within a field for quite a time are kind of already the experts. But I also think that AI can be a catalyst for your development in that field. So a young guy coming into nuclear fusion would have a shorter time period to actually get to that expert level if they use AI correctly.
Now, the other thing I'm thinking a lot about today is that AI is abundance, right? You can get answers to the most incredible questions whenever you want. And that's not something we've had before, this abundance of knowledge and this constant availability of ideas and creativity. How do I store and somehow order this stuff so when I need it, I actually can find it again?
Yeah, I think it's a really important thing to touch upon. And I feel that I'm a little bit lost in it myself. I'm not a very structured person. So I'm kind of struggling and I was just thinking about this yesterday, finding my system that I'm comfortable with. But then again, I think that we have a technology and there's so many cool programs and apps that are helpful in these kind of ways. So it's just important that you find the way it will work for you.
And there, my only thought is it's so important just to get into this, and I will need to stay on top of it. And I do think that the longer you wait with getting familiar with AI, the harder it will be to actually manage.
Yeah, I agree. And then also the gap feels bigger and bigger. And so I think that's one of my big wishes for 2025, that people just start using it.
I agree.
And get up on the train and just try.
So that I agree. Now, we had some other trends. Well, trend which I can see from my personal experience this year, and again, if you look in the newspapers, you can find all about it, is that there seems to be a decline in workplace well-being, in workplace engagement, in workplace mental health. I see that in the leaders and the teams I work with. They are tired, is the word I heard, overloaded. And when it becomes a bit more serious, burned out. It's something I really, really worry about, because coming back from a burnout or coming back from mental health problems takes time. Time is what we do not have anymore. What's your view there?
Yeah. I think that this is quite disturbing, right? The trends that we're seeing. I live in Norway, and we are one of the countries in the world that have the highest sick leave.
Wow. Yeah.
I think that one of the big issues actually is the lack of personal development and the lack of feedback that the typical employee are getting. So I think that, okay, you can manage a quite high workload if you feel that you are developing, that you are contributing to something that is important for you.
Yeah.
But if just going into the office and doing the same thing that you always done, but with more and more pressure on to deliver higher results or a higher output, I think that's a difficult and dangerous road to walk on. And I don't think that it will get better. I think it will become worse before it gets better.
Yeah, I agree. As you said, I think the pressure is the magic word here. I think there's a pressure to do more in less time with potentially less training.
Yeah, and just a short thing on that. I think that pressure is not only coming from the leaders. I also think that it's coming from the persons themselves, that they put that pressure upon themselves.
What I saw this year, a lot of talk about cross-collaboration issues. So a lot of teams which seem to be doing fine within the team, but a lot of stress and pressure coming from the collaboration between teams. But if those teams do not have the time to even get to know each other, and they are operating in different countries from very different angles and from very different functions, that frustration will almost for certain build. And then you put the pressure on.
Yeah.
And will build, and the blame and all of the things which bring stress will follow. I don't see a huge movement in actually working on workplace well-being. I think that sometimes things are done, but it's a one-shot approach. Let's take, Friday off and we do a team building, or we have somebody come in and talk about mindfulness.
Yeah.
Which is nice, but that's not a long-term strategy either, because what do we know about this the next Monday when the pressure is on again and we revert back to our old ways? And one thing I want to mention here as well is that I don't think we're really preparing and helping our leaders deal with this. Right? The pressure is on leaders to learn all kinds of new skills, but we're not really taking the time to teach them how to actually become better, including feedback.
Yeah, and like you said, the key word is pressure, right? I think that we need to find some tools to manage that pressure. Sometimes we need to kind of lighten it, and then you come into the feedback part. So again, I think that's why we took feedback as kind of our thing, because it's so important in everything, also in managing health issues, sick leave, and problems that we are seeing around workplaces.
It's about having the courage to put yourself in a sometimes vulnerable position to say, look, I need some help. I do feel stressed. I do feel overwhelmed. And then for the people who are listening to that, to help you figure out ways to alleviate some of that stress.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And you need to have these conversations, right? And you need to have them not just one time, but you need to kind of touch up on them. I remember us talking to Stephen, who is a pilot, and he said that every 3 months they come together and actually train on this and get feedback on it. And I think that that's something that we can incorporate into the more corporate world.
Yeah.
Like I said, Norway is one of the countries that are really suffering from this. And especially young workers, we have seen a significant increase in mental health issues. And I think that this stems from the lack of structures and clear expectations, where feedback plays a essential role. Because if you don't have that expectation on what you're going to deliver, I feel that there's so many people that are just trying to put in more and more, and then you come back to the pressure, right?
Yep,
So
that's
to
good.
have this really good discussions on what are you supposed to deliver on? How are you doing that? What are you doing good? What can you develop? I think we need to have more of those conversations.
I completely agree. Now, one thing I would like to kind of close our trends with is something we really didn't put in our book in 2016. You can become better at giving feedback. You can become better at receiving feedback. You can take it to the next level, which for us is always the gold standard. You can actually ask for feedback. You can work on the culture. You can do a lot of different things. But in the end, feedback is there to make a certain situation better, to close a certain gap with how it is to where we would like to take it tomorrow. And
Yeah.
that means change.
Yeah.
We seem to be abandoning, thank God, a bit this big change transformation mindset where you just take a bucket of paint and you throw it over the organization and the entire organization colors blue or red or whatever the corporate colors are. I more and more am becoming a huge fan of small change and tiny habits and making it as small and as easy as possible to do.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm now really talking about kind of the last mile of feedback, which is actually taking all of that feedback and doing something different. What are your thoughts on that?
I think that the devil is in the details, right? As you say, you have these companies that are trying to develop or meet new needs, and they start doing big changes. You put massive amount of more pressure into the organization and demand something really special of people to actually make that change. And in my experience, it's very hard to do. So I agree with you. I think that the solution is to start with the small things and to build healthy habits, because it's much more likely that you will succeed on maintaining those changes.
I agree. And I think it's an interesting time to talk about this because many people will have great aspirations for the new year. I was reading about gyms and, their best time of year is the next period because everybody pays sometimes for the whole year because they're really, really, really motivated. And then half of those people don't even come back after 2 months. And that sometimes feels counterintuitive because there's nothing wrong with saying I want to be a fit person. But the better thing would be to say, okay, but what does being a fit person mean and how can I bring it down? Well,
Yeah.
it could mean that I take a walk around the house every day. That is
Yeah.
tiny, tiny, tiny. It feels less interesting to talk about, but it's much more likely to be a success. And from that, you're going to take a longer walk. And maybe the next time you're going to actually running a bit. And then slowly but surely your body will adapt. And from success, you will move to next success. And I think that's where we need to go with teams and companies as well, is to say, okay, we have this beautiful aspiration of becoming a more trusting company, but that actually starts with being able to give each other feedback.
Yeah.
Or being able to breathe for 4 seconds before reacting to feedback. So I can see us spending a lot of time on actually helping people break down aspirations into tiny habits, as you say.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that the metaphor with running is so good, right? Because if you're not familiar with running and you start and say, I would like to run a marathon in 2 months, 3 months, whatever, you're in for hell. It's so hard to do big change.
Yes.
So I think it's one of the most important things to remember is to lower your standards and to don't set the bar too high on what you expect of yourself. And then you have to start with the small things, and you need to remember that it's so important to just show up every day. I see that motivation is like a fire, right? So you can take a can of gasoline and pour it on that fire and it blows up like the most people do in the first week in January. But the most important thing is to keep that fire going. And then you just need to kind of put one stick on that fire and to approach it in a different way. I think that's something that also it's challenging for us in the line of business that we are doing, right?
Yes.
Because people want change and they want it now. They want to have 1 or 2 workshops and then we're kind of finished and thank you.
Yeah.
Move on. But it doesn't work that way. Change takes time, and it's the little things that actually makes out the big change.
It reminds me of a client I have who came to me and said, look, I'd like to become a bit more vulnerable in the way I deal with my teams. Meaning he wanted to open up a bit more about the mistakes he sometimes makes, maybe a bit more about the way he feels or personal life, to create an environment in his team that other people also felt a bit more comfortable opening up about mistakes, because you can learn a lot from mistakes, right? And we also know that if people open up a bit more, we trust each other a bit more. We kind of discover our common humanity beyond just sitting there and doing work together. Now, it would have been very easy to have this massive aspiration to say, as of tomorrow, I'm going to open up about everything. Opening up, if you haven't done that before, has to be done like running in small parts. So one thing is then to actually break it down into small parts, and it could be literally as small as starting the Monday by saying what you did in the weekend.
Yeah.
Right? Now, the other part, which I always find it very useful also for myself, is there are going to be times when you forget about even the smallest things. And what helps is to have certain values. If, for example, I have a value of integrity, or I have a value of discipline or of trust, sometimes I will forget things, but that value will keep me on track again, because in the end, I am a person who wants to become more vulnerable or wants to be trusted.
Yeah.
That also means that I can forgive myself for not being perfect every day, but it gets me back again, because that's the person I want to be. So it's kind of an extra motivator on top of those smaller things we can do to provoke bigger change.
Now, I think that having the time to think about what's important for me, why is that important for me, going into the New Year's and wanting to make changes, it's so easy to kind of take all of the goals that society wants you to kind of do, right? Be healthy, to train, to make more money. But why? Why should you do those things? And I think then it's so important to have some kind of connection with your values, to actually know what kind of life you want and why that's important for you before you start making changes.
Yeah. I agree. And I think we both agree that probably will also find its way into our book and our articles. So kind of coming to the end here, Martin, what can people expect of us in 2025?
One thing is that we will continue to put out content, and we will try to make that content as valuable as possible. Our wish is that we will see a positive trend in how to give feedback, not just how to give it, but also how to receive it. And we hope that we can be a part of that positive trend.
Yeah, I think one of the things we have on our menu as well is using videos to share role plays where we actually, you and I, give each other feedback where we are good and when we are not so good. I'm very excited about the interviews we've got lined up. We have had 2 so far with Steven and with Luciano, but we've got a very, very amazing lineup for next year. What we will also do is launch our newsletter. So even if you miss certain pieces of content, you can always look and see what's interesting for you.
Yeah, and just also to build that archive with the blogs also on our website, that will also be a source for people to find both place and more information on how they can approach feedback on a more positive way. And of course, the book.
Absolutely. We are going to republish or publish, I would say, almost a new edition of Feedback First 2.0. But there again, Martin, we are taking our own medicine. We're not writing this book in one. We're writing it in very small pieces. We're sharing that with everybody as we go along. And that's why I'm very confident we will be able to launch that in 2025. Now, wish just one from all of the things we've been discussing for our audience out there.
Yeah, my biggest wish is that we manage to address the problem with mental health issues, especially with young workers. I think that it's so important, like I said earlier, to have these clear expectations. In that, feedback is so important. It's so hard to know if you're succeeding if you don't get feedback on what is important to deliver on. I think that one of the most important things for humans is the experience of growth. I think that as long as you kind of feel that you're developing, that is, for me at least, is the feeling of happiness, right? So if feel like I'm a little bit better today than I was yesterday, I'm kind of happy with that. And I think that is one of the most important things on dealing with increasing numbers of depression, angst, and other health issues.
I completely agree with you. And I think, as you said, feeling of progress, moving wherever that might be, because for different people, there are many different ways of experiencing progress is extremely important.
One of the things that I actually see in coaching that is one of the big issues for people is that they are too much obsessed with the goal itself.
Yeah.
And like we're talking about the running, right? If you say that I'm going to run a marathon and you haven't run all your life, that is a hard challenge to do. So then you will feel disappointed because you're not getting there fast enough. So the journey on how you're kind of getting to your goals and who you're becoming on that journey, it's much more important than the goal itself.
We tend to focus a lot on giving feedback. Yeah, most of the models we see out there are around giving feedback. And there's this notion that if you only give it good enough and calm enough and clear enough and empathetic enough and solution-oriented enough, it will all be fine. And in many times that is very helpful and it works, but many times we'll also see no matter what type of feedback ninja you are, if you're dealing with people who are a bit sensitive or are a bit tired that day or come from a different culture, it doesn't land. I more and more believe that if you have to put your focus somewhere, it's probably more in receiving the feedback and being able to put your emotions a bit aside or control them in such a way that you're actually able to unpack even the messiest of feedback and learn from that and ask questions and listen to what you're being told, even if what you're hearing, maybe it's not the right timing, but you're able to say, there is something in this which I can unpack. And I know there's a cliche around feedback is a gift and all of that. Well, yes, but to be able to unpack that, you need a certain type of resilience, just like you need a certain type of resilience when you're running a marathon. In fact, the only thing you're doing when you're preparing for a marathon is extending the distance and becoming more and more resilient to deal with some of the pain of running a marathon before you can actually get the joy out of running a marathon. So for myself, for you, for everybody around us, becoming a bit more resilient and becoming a bit stronger, taking in feedback, even if it's not perfect, I think would be amazing for 2025.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that cliches are cliches of a reason. It's because they're to the point. And may all our wishes come true, right?
Good. Well, as always, been a great conversation, and we look forward to Feedback First 2.0 in 2025.